What's stopping you from building efficient backend designs is the number of features you have in your requirements. The more features you have, the more corners you have to cut, the more less of a wiggle room you have, the more you're constrained. And I'll give you a very concrete example in a minute. But as you're building something, it says, oh, you tend to always go to the efficient path. That's how us software engineers naturally work. Right? Once you get certain experience, 3, 4, 5 years, then you start thinking about efficiency. It's like, okay, if I do this, then this is what happened, I'm gonna do that. So if as you're walking towards that path of efficiency, sorry if my finger is going to your ears or eyes, you will have this joy that, oh my God, this is an amazing app, this is amazing backend design, this is really great. But then you're hit by this, oh, I cannot do this, because if I do this, then that feature will not be possible, or to enable that feature is going to be really, really slow. So you'll have to think, okay, just to enable that feature, I'll have to add this table and this table and this table. I have to add this API, this API, this API. And then you'll figure it out and you'll move on. But you cut corners, and that suffers. The main problem is that's starting from scratch. Imagine if you're going to a software that is like well established, like Postgres. Just imagine how many corners did the Postgres team had to cut to enable all these features. What is the efficiency could have been if some of those features weren't even there? You see, there is this law that it's called the Pareto principle. 80-20, you're familiar with it. 80% of your users will likely only use 20% of the features. So it is a courageous act to cut features and only work with the very condensed features. That's why the most apps that win are the simplest app that does 1, 2, 3 things top, because there's just the art of software engineering comes out, and you can look at a piece of software and you can feel the engineer who built it. You can feel it. You can see him or her behind the UI, behind the software architecture. You can absolutely look at a software system architecture and say, why is there so many boxes here? Why is this exist? You keep asking questions. And here's the problem with existing open source software. If you go and you're presented with like Postgres process architecture, like all these processes, I would probably count on half a hand. How does that work? It's like only on one hand. I'm gonna need probably very few fingers to count the number of engineers who know exactly why every single feature or every single design, why does it exist, or every single line of code, why is it there. You'll see parts of code that says, well, there is part of code and nobody dares to remove, because guess what? Nobody understands why it's there. Well, nobody remembers even why it's there. Or, most frighteningly, if we remove it, something will break. And that fear, the human nature emotion, fear, is what's limiting our backend system design potential. I was reading a story for my kid yesterday about emotions, and fear was one of them. Fear is this I forgot what it was, the statement, but fear is just a natural emotion. And we're always afraid to remove things because if it breaks, we're worried about our reputation, man. So what does that say about me if I break the software? That's the most important thing that we're afraid of. But if we kind of set our ego aside and you just try to build, and I'm not saying go and break Postgres and remove all the features, but like rethink it from the ground up. Like, what is the most important things that users mostly use? Like, I'll speak to myself. I just need a database that stores rows and columns and have an index features. That's what you almost need. That's the basic things. Like, of course, it's always nice to add repeatable reads and isolation levels and ACID and atomicity and transactions. These are important things, but do we really need all of them? That's why I commit some new startups that remove some of these isolation levels. It says, guys, sorry, read committed is all what you get, or serializable is all what you get, and that's it. Then, of course, you run into certain customers who wants this feature and that feature and that feature, but you have to assess, if I add that feature, what would I sacrifice? And the answer is almost a lot. And the answer is almost, you don't know what you're going to sacrifice because you already forgot. Because you built all this piece of software, but you've already forgot most of it, especially after like a year or two, right? It's gonna change, things change. But yeah, the thing I want to end off is, in my company, we built this software like 30 years ago that has a lot of features, but one of them was built and then customer did use that feature, but it turns out to be causing more problems than solve conveniences actually. So we decided to redesign that whole piece of software, removing that feature, and no exaggeration, that got rid of like 5 or 6 system tables and simplified the SQL query, and it just like everything felt so much easier. Of course, we run into other problems on the way, but that's just the nature of building software. But it just fascinates me when you just remove something. And of course, 1 or 2 users will complain that, hey, I used to be able to do this, but I can't anymore. And once you give them another workflow using your software, so it's like you're building with the flow instead of just changing the whole software to satisfy it, they're often happy with it. So, and I'm not saying this always works. Of course, sometimes you remove a feature and there's a big backlash, right? But it's just having at the end of this video, having the courage to remove features, having the courage to kind of limit the number of features you have. And I promise, software design and backend design, to be specific, is going to become much more enjoyable experience. If you want to polish your backend engineering skills in the fundamentals so that you have a rock solid base, check out my fundamentals of backend engineering and the rest of my courses over here.